Darkness, it can only last so long. Then sunshine brings a new day. Your shackles, they will fall to the ground. Do not be afraid. Don't be afraid, for I am with you. Do not fear, I won't let you fall. Come to me with your burdens heavy. Do not be afraid. Fear ain't nothing but a liar. When doubt comes knocking at your door, on your knees you'll find peace, and you don't need to be afraid. Don't be afraid, for I am with you. Do not fear, I won't let you fall. Come to me with your burdens heavy. Do not be afraid, because in your heart there lies a comfort that no one can dethrone. So come to me and I'll guarantee you will never be alone. Don't be afraid, for I am with you. Don't fear, I won't let you fall. Come to me with your burdens heavy. Don't be afraid, for I am with you. Do not fear, I won't let you fall. Come to me with your burdens heavy. Do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. Do not be afraid.
Thank you. Good morning, church.
Good morning, Matthew.
Good morning. We're so glad that you're joining us at our final week of our sermon series about what it means to be disciples. We're glad that you've been on this journey with us. We are celebrating our fall kickoff today as well. So after the service, make sure you go to the social hall and enjoy some fellowship time there. And all kinds of activities happening around the church. If you have questions, please talk to any of the pastors, and we will direct you to where the activities are happening. But we're so glad that you are with us this Sunday morning and joining us as we're exploring our faith deeper. We always like to begin our worship service, whether you're joining us online or here in this sacred space, by waving the peace of Christ, sharing the love of God with one another. So please say good morning, welcome. We're so glad that you are here this morning.
Good morning. If you take a look at the east side of our property, you will see about 20 fruit trees in that space and some cherry bushes. I don't know if you would call them trees or not, but we have already harvested several of the items in that space, including peaches and cherries. Much of that harvest has already been donated to our service partners in the city, but some of them were still in great shape, but they had either kind of fallen to the ground or had a spot on them that made it maybe not as appealing to be donated. And so we kept those items, the pieces that were good, and they are being transformed into fruit pies. Guaranteed the best that you'll have. We'll have some for donation for sale next Sunday in the narthex area. Some of them will be smaller, kind of personal sized, and some of them will be larger movie night, enjoy it pies. That personalized, personal, and then still personal. They'll go quickly. They'll be in the narthex next Sunday. Those donations will continue to go towards those community partners as we support them with not only food donations, but monetary donations as well. So take a look both after the 9 and the 11 o'clock next Sunday.
Good morning, church. I'm Stan Chandler. I am, along with my brother Greg, on the property committee, and I'm also on a building committee, and then kind of on the green team. And why I bring all that up, I'm on the green team, well, I'm kind of on it. But why I bring all that up is there's something stirring in the church. We're looking at some potential capital projects or just improvements throughout the building. You see a list up behind me that we kind of had these identified by, some of these were identified by the green team, some of these projects or areas were identified by the building use team. And so we took all this input from these two committees, put it together, shook it up, and actually did some prioritization at MLT. And this is kind of the order that we're looking at now. Bathrooms seem to be a big thing that people want to get taken care of, and that's the two bathrooms, or two sets of bathrooms here in this back hall, and then the one off the office. So with that said, we've got to figure out, what are these things going to cost so we can even prioritize more, and that's kind of the stages we're in right now. We have engaged with Mantel Teeter, who is the architect that has done a lot of the work for us before, did the last couple of renovations as well as the Stepping Stones area. And so we're going to have them look at things and kind of put some schematic information together for us so that we can get some pricing and then figure out how much is this going to cost, and with that knowledge, go forward and figure out, do we need to ask for a capital campaign, or what can we do to get some of these things done? So is there anything else I need to say about those things? Basically, the ones in the bolded ones are what Mantel Teeter will kind of look at and give us some ideas. The bathroom, really, from an infrastructure standpoint, would be one of the bigger ones. The other ones are a little more aesthetic. Let's pretty up this sanctuary. Do we need to do finishes and that kind of thing? And the other spaces, the same. There's some revisions to those that people are interested in. So stay tuned. You'll hear more later after we get a little further along, but we wanted to let you all know that that's going on. So thank you.
All right, you want to join with us, Stan, and get ready to sing a few songs this morning about rivers?
There's a couple of river songs. It's in honor of your old dog.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's right. Oh, all right, let's sing.
Mercy, compassion, kindness and love, justice, forgiveness, poured out from above. There's a river of mercy flowing on high, waters of justice cross the sky. There's a river of mercy that shines in the night, a river of mercy that flows through you and I. Thirsty, hungry, strangers in need, lonely, outcast, prisoners to free. There's a river of mercy flowing on high, waters of justice cross the sky. There's a river of mercy that shines in the night, a river of mercy that flows through you and I. mountain, the river flows, and it brings refreshing wherever it goes. Through the valleys and over the hills, the river is rushing and the river is here. The river of God sets our feet a-dancing. The river of God fills our hearts with cheer. The river of God fills our mouths with laughter, and we rejoice, for the river is here. The river of God is teeming with life, and all who touch it can be revived. And those who linger on this river shore will come back thirsting for more of the Lord. The river of God sets our feet a-dancing. The river of God fills our hearts with cheer. The river of God fills our mouths with laughter, and we rejoice, for the river is here. Up to the mountain we love to go, to find the presence of the Lord. Along the banks of the river we run, we dance with laughter, giving praise to the sun. The river of God sets our feet a-dancing. The river of God fills our hearts with cheer. The river of God fills our mouths with laughter, and we rejoice, for the river is here. Down the mountain the river flows, and it brings refreshing wherever it goes. Through the valleys and over the hills, the river is rushing and the river is here. The river of God sets our feet a-dancing. The river of God fills our hearts with cheer. The river of God fills our mouths with laughter, and we rejoice, for the river is here. Yes, we rejoice, for the river is here.
Fine job, fine job. You may be seated.
It's good to be gathered here in worship this morning. Will you all join me in the call to worship? God, there are times we wonder. God, there are times we wonder. God, there are times we wonder. In our stillness, may your presence be revealed.
Friends, as we are gathered together for worship, we also use this time to be in prayer, both with one another and for one another. Would you join me in a word of prayer? God of all time, you are indeed our refuge and our strength. In you we have entrusted our deepest hopes and our heartfelt needs. In the stillness of this place, hear the cries upon our lips. Some call out for healing, beset daily with pain, a future clouded by uncertainty, shaken by anxiety and helplessness, both for ourselves and those in our closest circles of love. Lord, hear our prayer. Some cry out for peace. We carry daily the very real concerns of nation against nation, neighbor against neighbor, the violence in our backyard, and the fear and mistrust it instills. Lord, hear our prayer. Be still, knowing that our stillness is not a substitute for action. Be still, knowing that our stillness is a place for listening and discernment. Be still, knowing that our stillness does not isolate us, but connects us more fully to God and one another. And now we lift up our voices as one, praying aloud together. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen.
Good morning, church. I want to thank everyone that helped get Stepping Stones Preschool ready for another school year. Stepping Stones, if you don't know what it is a preschool. It is a beautiful ministry that is offered by our church that runs throughout the school year. It is an absolute joy to see and hear the children in the building each and every day. Students started this last week, and I wasn't sure we were going to make that happen. Back in March, there was some water that caused a flooring issue in many of our classrooms. Now we have freshly painted walls and newly installed floors, and we're back. Teachers, students, and families were all excited to see the upgrades in the building and get back to school. I would like to share a huge thank you to all of those that helped along the way. All of you that helped move furniture, books, toys, and classroom items to prepare for the new flooring. And then moved it back so the teachers could get ready for their students. There are also those of you that came and built items, helped install cabinets, put booklets together, and got copies made so we were ready to go. Matthew and Kevin helped pick up trash and weeded our front entry with a group of volunteers, and organized more volunteers to come in and help set up classrooms. Our ministry leadership team, women's ministry, and the admin department provided meals and snacks and overall support for our staff. Also, thank you for checking on me, because I about lost my mind over the last few months. I wasn't sure this was gonna happen, but it takes a village, and I am glad to be a part of this village. It is an honor to be a part of this village. I appreciate you all and all the time and all the love you show to this church family. If you would like to make a donation, you can visit our website or place your offering in the stained glass box in the narthex. Please join me in prayer. Merciful God, even as we speak to you in prayer, may we also hear you calling us to be faithful stewards. Give us insight into the needs of our children so that we can respond with offerings of love and concern. Amen. At this time, I'd like all my children to join me for worship and wonder.
Well, good morning, church. It's a privilege to be here with you this morning as we continue in our third week sermon series, reflecting on this idea of who we are as disciples of Christ and what does that mean. And so this week we're going to be looking at prayer. Before I go too far, though, I just want to briefly highlight, so on the fall kickoff, there will be muffins, there will be fruit trays over there in our social hall, so please feel free afterwards to at least, go grab some morning carbs in case you need that, or in case I put you to sleep here in the next 20 minutes. There's some caffeine coffee there too. But you can check that out. Also, just encourage you to check out the tables, because if, you've been visiting with us for a while, or you're just looking, I'd really like to get involved in a group somehow. There's going to be tables with leaders reflecting on all the different ways that you can get involved deeper in either small groups here, or if passionate about hobbies, the peacemakers, if you love to quilt, they're there. If you love to garden, the Welcome Garden will be there to answer questions. So just encourage you to highlight that, and by all means, you're welcome to stay for lunch. I know it makes a long morning, but we'd love to have you. Today, I chose Psalm 46 as my scripture passage to reflect on as we get started today. And you're going to hear it or see it in one version up on the screen, but I chose to read this version written by Robert Altair because there's some things I love about it. One of the things you'll learn about the Psalms is that they were actually written in Hebrew. And so depending on what version you pick up, they might look a little different because no language picks up the exact same in another language, and so words can be translated differently. So here are these words from Psalm 46. For the lead player, for the Korites on the Alamoth a psalm, God is a shelter and a strength for us, a help in straits readily found. Therefore we fear not when the earth breaks apart, when mountains collapse in the heart of the seas. Its waters roar and roil, mountains heave in its surge. A stream, its rivulets, gladden God's town, the holy dwelling of Elon. God in its midst, it will not collapse. God helps it as morning breaks. Nations roar and kingdoms collapse. He sends forth his voice and the earth melts. The Lord of armies is with us, a fortress for us, Jacob's God. Go, behold, the acts of the Lord, who made desolations on earth, caused wars to cease to end of the earth. The bow he has broken and splintered the spear, and chariots burned in fire. Let go and know that I am God. I loom among the nations, I loom upon the earth. The Lord of armies is with us, a fortress for us, Jacob's God. So today's theme is prayer, a universal, I think in most denominations and even in a lot of faiths, we would highlight prayer is an essential part of what we believe, what we do. And so that's why today we felt like would be a good week to pick up what does this mean as we reflect on it as disciples of Christ. But I got to say, as I started this morning, Thursday night, it was getting past my bedtime. But I could just feel all sorts of prayers going on in Kansas City. I mean, I don't know why. There's just something about there's like less than 2 minutes left. Or no, it's a little over 2 minutes left in this game. And all of a sudden, it was 4th and 20. And so I could just feel prayers starting to be lifted up. And then it became 4th and 25. And then the prayers were really being lifted up. And then the questions came because the ball went through the hands. And we're like, God, come on. I know we won the Super Bowl, but why? Why couldn't you just answer tonight's prayer? And so there's humorous moments about prayer like that. There's funny stories like that where, we've all done it, whether it's our favorite sports team. But then there's the stories involving prayer that really begin to perhaps unsettle us and shake us up and maybe make us wrestle with what we believe. especially in regards to God. You see, it was our end of school summer celebration at the previous church I worked at. Annually, we would, to celebrate the end of summer and highlight it was that time to be getting ready to go back to school, we would plan some type of fun fellowship activity for all the youth to go on. And so that year we decided to go to Worlds of Fun. Always a good place and a good time to kind of celebrate, get one last hurrah in before it was time for books and study halls and all that comes with it. And so going to World's Fun is kind of a longer activity, and so we didn't get all the young people back to the church until after 9 o'clock. And at the time, I was living 30 minutes away from where the church was at. And so I'm driving home feeling really good about the event. Everything had gone really well. Everyone seemed to have a good time. And I pull into the parking lot of where our condo was living when all of a sudden my phone began to ring. And as many of you might know, when your phone starts ringing at that time of night, you know it's usually not a good thing. And sure enough, I was being asked to please get to the high school as soon as possible. You see, earlier in that evening, the quarterback for the football team, who was getting ready to have their first game that Friday night, was out with some friends having fun, and they were coming home and lost control of his car, and he crashed it. And at the time, word got out very quickly that, he was being rushed to the hospital. They didn't really know conditionings. Things weren't necessarily looking great, but there was still hope. And so many of the young people, texting one another, decided they wanted to be together in that moment of pain and just lifting up prayers. And so they all said, let's start meeting up at the high school. And so it wasn't long before adults said, okay, we'll open the doors. And I, along with several other adults, was asked to come just be there with these young people. And as I was in that room, listening to some of the most gut-wrenching, honest, transparent prayers I'd ever heard in my life, I just couldn't even imagine that God wouldn't hear such a prayer like that. And so we're gathered there with them, letting them be who they need to be in that moment and processing all that's going on. And all of a sudden, the adults, we get a tip to come over. One of the adults had been in touch with the family, and it was discussed in the adults group that we found out this young person was not going to make it, that news was going to be coming out soon that this young man had passed. And so we decided that it was really important at that point to get all these young people home safely, to be with their families when this news came out. And so we kind of tried to find a way to close it up there at the high school and got them home. When the news came out, this young man passed. And as you can imagine, that's when all the questions start popping up. Questions of why? Why, God? Do you not care? Do you not hear the prayers that we have to offer? And just wondering, do our words even matter? And I imagine I'm not alone. Imagine some of you possibly in this room this morning have had experiences in life like that where you're just wondering, does this really work? Does prayer really make a difference in the 21st century, or is it just something to make me feel more comfortable and good with who I am? And so prayer, I think, in many ways in our time has become a complex subject, especially how it's even gotten consumed by the polarization and politics in our society we have today. After all, it seems like whenever a tragedy pops up in our nation right now, I'm thinking of those possible shootings of multiple victims, and someone might make a comment that, we need to lift up and hold the families in prayer, and that's quickly rebutted by others who are saying, you know what, your prayers sound really hollow anymore because you're not willing to act or change anything. And so is it any wonder then the easiest and fastest way to get a room to get quiet in our day and age, whether it's young people or adults, is simply ask, hey, would anybody like to close us in prayer? Immediately everybody's, You see, on one hand, we say prayer is essential to our faith and our life, but on the other hand, if we're really transparent with one another, the reality is for a lot of us, prayer can perhaps make us uncomfortable, perhaps even a bit terrifying if we're asked to pray in front of others. And after all, we like to lean on those verses then that like Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount when he said, do not go out in the public and make your prayers known out in the public square, but go in private. And so we lean on those and we say, no, the community prayer thing, that's only for Minister Seth, Kelly, Kevin, and Matthew to take on. But the reality is, I wonder, have we perhaps narrowed our vision, narrowed our understanding too much, and simplified prayer? And is that perhaps why it makes it so uncomfortable? After all, so many times I've heard the definition of prayer is, it's communication. Communication with God, and double bonus points if you recognize that communication with God means you can't be the only one who's talking. You got to let God have some room to talk back as well. And that seems to be our understanding that we often so use about prayer, that is this idea that we lean on these verses targeting that says, if you ask, if you seek, if you knock, God will surely answer. But what I want to wonder with you all this morning is, what if we need to reframe our understanding of prayer in this practice? And what if prayer is more than communication? What if prayer is perhaps more like Paul suggests when he says, pray without ceasing, a way we live, a way we look at life, a way that helps us interact with those around us, whether they're our friends, whether they're our neighbors. And so this draws us to our scripture for today, Psalm 46. And I just want to take a moment and highlight a little bit about the Psalms. Because you see, today, especially in churches, we often jump to the Gospels. We turn to the Gospels because we focus on Jesus, as we have articulated that he is the person that has really brought faith into focus for us in so many ways. But before that, over 2,000 years ago, scholars believe that the Psalms were used as a very much central part of worship. And in fact, if you would open your Bible to that Old Testament section of the Psalms, these were actually used each week, possibly. Not just said quietly by a person, but we think they believe they actually sung them or possibly chanted them. And I find that truly fascinating, because if you take the time to look through these Psalms, you don't find just one emotion there. You don't just find this idea that if you just believe hard enough, God will bless you. You find pretty much the full range of human emotion expressed in these Psalms. There's Psalms like Psalm 23 that's about trust in the midst of uncertainty and finding joy. Kind of like the River of God this morning was a psalm that I hope we all got a little more upbeat, even though, we're called kind of quietly about it. But, there's Psalms there that talks about jumping with joy and celebration and being amazed by the wonders around us. And then there's Psalms there that talk about feeling like they're being forgotten by God, that perhaps God is forsaking them. And then there's even Psalms in there, if you look through there, that deals with the fact that there's sometimes we feel angry, and there's sometimes we feel mad, and actually there are sometimes we even have hatred for our enemies. And I promise you, those Psalms are in there if you take the time to look. You see, Psalm 46 is no different. It's not trying to pretend like everything's just going to be A-okay if you believe in God. It starts highlighting some of the problems the author or authors seem to be facing in that day and in that time. And I think there are actually problems you and I can relate to, especially as we hear these lines about mountains and the earth giving away and mountains falling into the heart of the sea. How many of us haven't felt rocked by perhaps knowing loved one or friends that have had to deal with some of these hurricanes that seem to be getting more devastating, or wildfires? It's getting harder and harder to say, I don't know anyone that hasn't faced some type of devastation from the weather events we've been facing. Or what about those lines about nations are in uproar, kingdoms fall apart? For the psalmist author, it seems like the world is falling apart, and how many of us haven't perhaps expressed that emotion ourselves in recent days? As whether it was the war in Afghanistan or the current war that is brewing in Ukraine, we all, I think, can relate to the psalmist who feels a little anxious about everything that's going on in life. And so how should we respond? How should we handle this anxiety? What does the psalmist suggest that perhaps is the way to go? Where can we find that solace and comfort? It seems counterintuitive, but in verse 10, the psalmist suggests that, yeah, it might feel like the world is falling apart right now, but rather than the need to work harder, rather than simply just trying to believe more, maybe the most important thing we can do in this moment is to be still. I love the way Robert Alter translates to let go and know that God is here with us. You see, this verse reminds me of one of the best descriptions of prayer that I have ever come across, and I've highlighted and underlined, and I come back to on again, off again. They're from this author called Mark Yaconelli, and he's not just an author. I've actually had the opportunity to meet him. He's not one of those that simply writes a book to sell it. He definitely lives what he's writing about, and so he writes in this book, Downtime, about prayer, and he says this: one of the most overlooked aspects of prayer is that prayer is a learning process. In prayer, we are learning who we are. We are learning how to live our lives. We are learning to let go of our sin and fear and to trust divine love. Prayer is a deep place of deep transformation. It is a school of spiritual living in which God serves as teacher. See, I love this description of prayer because I think it pushes back on this idea of if we can just find the right formula, if we can just somehow speak the right words or perhaps form the right actions, this will get God to move and act. And he actually proposes that maybe prayer is a lot bigger than we realize. You see, prayer helps us reframe, to perhaps maybe understand things in a different way. After all, I think one of the most remarkable stories that's not told about the story of Israel is the fact that this group of people was willing to put in print for all time and admit that sometimes we messed up. Sometimes we got it wrong. It's not simply that the gods of Babylon were bigger or the gods of the Roman Empire bigger. Sometimes we got it wrong in our relationship with God, and we messed up because we forgot it's about taking care of one another and generosity for the poor, and they actually put it in print for all time. When's the last time we heard a nation or a political leader willing to admit, I screwed up? It doesn't happen. And yet, here Israel, because in their life of prayer, this opportunity to be reformed and transformed, are willing to put it in there for all time. And this is what I think the power of prayer we perhaps misunderstand when we think it's just about words. And I honestly was reminded of this not too long ago because for the first time since COVID, we hope we're past COVID, but it's probably with us for all of time at this point as it's out there. But this year was the first time in a long time. I used to do this on a regular basis, but earlier this year I asked admin permission and got approval to go to St. John's Abbey in Minnesota for a couple nights. It's near a town out in the Minnesota woods near Minneapolis, about an hour and a half northwest of there. And it's this Benedictine community. with the monastery, and it's heavily emphasized in nature and creation and the outdoors, and so it just provides all these spots and spaces to really live into this practice that perhaps prayer is more than simply words, that perhaps it's an opportunity to be still. And so I get there, only have 2 nights, but I can't tell you how much in those 2 nights alone I was reminded of how much stress I had been carrying inside of me, holding on to for so long. As I let the prayers of the daily office work inside of me, as I spent time just being still, I was reminded in those couple of days, and I might even shared a tear or two, that I was more than the emails I sent. I was more than the clicks that were getting put on social media for this or that I was more worthy of respect and dignity than if I could succeed at this aspect of my job or not. I was reminded that there is more to life than simply what I do for others. See, I think that's a little bit of what Yekaneli is trying to reveal to us. It's not something that's forced. No one forced me to go up there, and that's the thing I believe about God. God doesn't force God on us. God continually waits for us to take the opportunity to be still, to perhaps learn these new rhythms. It's then at these points where prayer invites us to perhaps feel compassion for ourselves, compassion for others. That prayer helps us see God possibly in a new light like it did for Israel. Prayer, I believe, is a practice that breathes life into the community. Recently, I came across these words from a rabbi who I confess I will probably butcher his name, but Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi writes this: "The problem is that our ancient faith has become over-verbalized and under-experienced. We talk too much and feel too little." See, even this rabbi is pointing and suggesting that maybe prayer is less about talking, and prayer is meant to be more about feeling. And so what I want to offer you today as we're coming to the closing is that maybe if you're wrestling with your prayer practice, maybe you don't keep batting at it if you're just not, if it's frustrating you, if you feel like, I'm not getting anything out of this. Maybe what's being offered in that moment is maybe that's not the prayer practice for you. Because that's the thing about prayer, is there's all sorts of ways that God desires to connect with us. And so maybe what that is an invitation. Maybe I need to explore a different way of prayer. Because I truly do believe that prayer invites us to feel, to not become apathetic. And so it's finding that prayer practice that helps us become fuller human, more enriching, to be a better human neighbor to one another, to our friends, to our family, to the stranger. And so maybe the best thing we can do is not just simply talk about prayer, but find those opportunities to practice it. You see, I'm convinced of this not just because of everything I shared this morning, but I'm also convinced of it because of our middle schoolers. You see, this summer, our middle schoolers, as many of you were here that Sunday, talked about their trip to Colorado. And on that last night of our Colorado trip, we didn't do anything fancy. We didn't go to a theme park. We didn't go to some place of extravaganza with multiple screens. Rather, what we did is we drove up to the side of a mountain and we offered the young people the opportunity to be still, to spend some time slowing down, to give them the opportunity to just reflect on who they were and who they were becoming. and to take in the sunset and know that God was with him. And it was after this activity, one of those young people came up to me on a day where we had enjoyed sugar overloads at this local ice cream place, and a day where we played ball in the backyard and played in a hot tub. Afterwards, a young person from our group came up to me and said, "You know what? This was my favorite activity we did today." See, that's the power of slowing down and letting prayer perhaps work inside of us. And so I'm going to have to adjust a little bit. We hope Joy's doing all right. We usually have a musical reflection. I was going to invite you into a meditation as that before the communion table. But here's what I'm going to do instead this morning. So I'm just going to give us 1 minute. I know some of us, this might terrify you. You're like, "Oh my goodness, a minute of silence in a group of people. What do I do?" It's okay. Take a deep breath. In fact, what I want to encourage you is to take multiple deep breaths for this minute. But here's what I also want you to do in that minute. You see, I believe God made us as human beings, which I believe means God can also use our imagination just as much as anything else. And so here's what I just want to invite you to experiment with. Remember, Yaconelli says it's a learning process. It's a time to experiment. So I want you, as you're breathing in, to just imagine that you are breathing in the love of God. However that might look to you, however you might understand that. And then as you're breathing in, on the flip side of that, as you're breathing out, every single one of us, I have no doubt, came in here this morning carrying some stresses. I just want to invite you in that space as you're breathing out to perhaps let go of that stress as you're reminded, as you're breathing in, that the love of God is here right now with all of us. Can we do that? Is that going to be okay? All right. So I'm just going to offer a brief prayer to get us started, and then we'll offer that minute of silence. Gracious God, there are times words fail. There are times that words cannot even fully describe the feelings we have inside of us. Help remind us in those moments that perhaps the most important thing we can do is to let go of our words, is to let go of our activities, and to just be still and know that you are here with us. Amen.
Over these past few weeks, we have been exploring and learning what it means to be disciples of Christ, to be part of this community of faith. We've looked at Scripture and what it means to us and how we explore it and go deeper, how it shapes our faith. And speaks to us, even though it is an ancient text. We've talked about the importance of prayer and how it shapes and directs not only our relationship with God, but with one another and our practice of faith in the church as well. We talked about key beliefs, loving God, loving neighbor, and next week as we wrap up this sermon series, we will talk about the welcome table and what it means to us to come every week to this sacred space. But even before we hear a sermon about it, we know, we feel, and we experience it each week as we come to gather around this table. In a moment, you're going to have an opportunity to gather around other tables and experience God's welcome and the welcome that we provide for one another. This is not something that we manufacture. It is a gift from God for us to be welcomed just as we are at this table. And the myriad of beliefs that we hold and the myriad of practices we engage in, you are welcome at this table. If it is your first Sunday here, you've been here many times before, you are welcome at this table. If you see the world differently than I do, you are welcome at this table. Let us receive this gift, this blessing, once more, as we remember that long ago, Jesus took bread, broke it, and offered it to every single person gathered there, saying, "Take and eat. This is my body, broken for you." And after they shared the meal together, he shared with them also the cup, and he said, "Take and drink. This is the cup of a new covenant, which is poured out for the forgiveness of sins. Do this in remembrance of me." And so once more we eat and we drink together, reminding us of the welcome we receive. Friends, will you stand with us as we sing our benediction this morning?
This is holy ground. We're standing on holy ground. For the Lord is present, and where he is holy. This is holy ground. We're standing on holy ground. For the Lord is present, and where he is holy. We are standing on holy ground, and I know that there are angels all around. Let us praise Jesus now. We are standing in God's presence on holy ground. These are holy hands. He's given us holy hands. He works through these hands, and so these hands are holy. These are holy hands. He's given us holy hands. He works And so these hands are holy. We are standing on holy ground, and I know that there are angels all around. Let us praise Jesus now. We are standing in God's presence on holy ground.
Let us say together, our service has ended, our ministry now begins. Y'all have a great week.